Hi everyone, my name is Vanessa Hernandez and I'm here with Jacqueline, and our presentation is going to be on being against free range and pasture raised. First, I'm going to start off by defining free range and pasture raised. So free range animals are given less than 2 square feet per hen, and this is technically more space, and this is actually more space than caged and cage-free animals. However, the free should be taken lightly and with a grain of salt, as the animals are rarely ever able to see actual daylight. While they are free-range animals, they obtain a corn and soy-based diet. Also, pasture-raised animals are given at least 108 square feet each while consuming grass, bugs, and worms. They are typically let out in the morning and brought in before the sun is set, according to Certified Humane. Moving forward to the history of domesticated animals, in Mesopotamia, around the same time plants became domesticated, animals were also tamed for their meat, milk, and their skin. In Southeast Asia, sheep were domesticated between 18,000 or between 11,000 and 9,000 BC, and then eventually goats followed in 8,000 BC. Also, in a city called Marisha, a city located between Jerusalem and Egypt, they were discovered to have well-preserved chicken bones that contained knife marks from butchering. According to National Public Radio, it was assumed that these knife marks were used and that the chickens were used for their meat and for butchering and for that kind of use. So what this led to, in the 1800s and the early 1900s, many households contained backyard flocks of dual-purpose chickens, so for personal consumption and for personal use and for all of that. And then in the 1920s to the 1930s, broiler production was established. So broiler chickens or broilers are chickens that are basically raised with the sole purpose of producing meat. So they're raised specifically for food and for producing their meat. Geographical expansion was important during this time. It was important to take into consideration the weather and the land that you were producing your meat on and having your animals graze. Obviously, you can't raise chickens and beef and cattle and all that stuff in a really cold, really cold environment or anywhere that doesn't produce a lot of grass for them to eat. So this was very important around this time. Also in the 1940s to the 1960s, feed mills, hatcheries, farms, and processors went from operating as separate entities and basically individually to kind of a combined industry and into an integrated industry. As far as pasture raised, pasture raised was defined in the 1940s by the British Free Range Standard. So they defined pasture raised based on rotational grazing needs. This is basically to make sure of viable grass, so usable grass and soil for other crops or for other animals, not necessarily to ensure the animal's welfare. With this being said, two primary certifiers still in the US still embraced and adopted this term as the pasture raised standard. So culturally, chicken is pretty important in the US. In 2016, according to the National Chicken Council, about 92% of American consumers bought chicken regularly. In the same study, it showed that 71% of consumers were extremely or very concerned about food safety, and only 19% of respondents were extremely or very concerned about the time it took to raise a chicken. And in a study conducted by Business Analysis at Iowa State University, the term pasture-raised beef had no meaning to more than 15% of the respondents. So although it had no meaning to more than 15% of the respondents, more than 80% of the respondents were somewhat to very satisfied with pasture-raised milk and dairy products. So these are just a handful of the statistics that show that we as a society enjoy and care about what we put in our bodies. But with the unclear regulations about how these products are manifested, it makes it easy for the industry to convince us that the meat that we're consuming is handled the way we imagine them being handled. When I imagine the term pasture raised or free range, I imagine chickens and goats and sheep and cows enjoying a bunch of free land soaking in the sun, and that's how that's how the industry wants us to picture it, and that's how they want us to believe that these animals are being produced and handled. However, it's clear that in the regulations and in the rules that that's not technically how it goes. So I think this is pretty important, and I think that culturally and in society we are not educated of these things. So yeah. So with that being said, it actually raises the question towards the ethical aspects towards free range and pasture raised animals. So despite being guaranteed that these animals are not subject to the harshness of cages and are able to roam the outdoors freely, it raises question as to if the welfare of the animals are really a priority. Um, are the or is the free range and pasture raised environment suitable? So basically, where they're being raised and the environment that they're being put in, is it suitable for the animals? Are the animals in a comfortable position? So, for example, are the free range grasslands like are is it sunny? Is it hot? Or is there any way and any place for them to be protected from potential predators, the heatness of the sun? Yeah. And are these requirements and standards misleading? So how much time is really enough time for these animals, and how much space is really enough space?
Some things to consider of why you shouldn't have free range animals. The cons are supervision is important. So if the animals are out there roaming around and somebody has to be watching them so that way they don't get into things, they're going to be curious. They want to go here, do that. So you have to be able to watch them at all times. And also when feeding those free range animals, you need to know how much the animal is actually eating individually, each one. So that way you know that they're even eating and if they are even getting the right amount of nutrients that they need and water and things like that. Eating the garden, if you have a garden, the chickens, goats, rabbits, and other animals, they're going to go into that garden and they're going to eat all the growing food, the plants, whatever is in that garden, they're going to want to eat it and you won't have a garden any longer. Hiding eggs. Any bird that is free range will most likely make a nest away from the home, and that's where they'll keep their eggs to themselves, and they won't want to share them with you as the owner, and you will have any produce to have for yourself or go maybe and sell and things like that. Manner is one of the cons for having free range animals. They will most likely poop wherever they want because they're so open and free out there on the land, and it makes it harder for you to clean up the poop and things like that, and so it's a lot more for you to handle and a lot more work. It also makes the manure collection harder to collect for composting. For the land, if you want to have free range animals and you need more land, it's going to cost more money for you. And also, when you take into consideration the population of the world and wherever you may live is always growing, and so they always need new buildings and houses and stores and things. It's always growing, and so if you want to buy that extra land, then you're taking away from that. The next one is sociological importance. So free range meat and produce are more expensive. The free range meat or eggs, they are more expensive, and that's because to raise those animals properly, the free range animals, it requires more effort and more expense. Since a lot of the effort is put into those animals, the produce will sell for more. but you have to consider all the work and everything that's being put into that in order to be able to sell those for more. Free range doesn't necessarily mean free. Birds raised for meat may be sold as free range if they have a government certified access to the outdoors. The door could be only open for 5 minutes or so, and then the farm still qualifies as free range. Apart from the open door, no other criteria such as environmental quality, types of birds, or space per bird are included in the term free range. So yes, your animals may be considered free range, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're always out there, always in the open, always on their own, doing their own thing. So you could be selling your produce and stuff for more, but it's not even what the produce is actually being sold for. Also, on this slide, we have debeaking, and that is when the free-range hens are typically debeaked as chicks at the hatchery, the same as a battery-caged hens. Debeaking is a painful facial mutilation that impairs a hen's ability to eat normally and preen her feathers. Typically 2,000 to 20,000 or more hens, each hen having 1 square foot of living space the size of a sheet of paper, are confined in a shed with little or no access to the outdoors. If the hens can go outside, the exit is often very small, allowing only the closest hen to get out, and the range may be nothing more than a mud yard saturated with manure. So once again, free range isn't what it all means when they say free range. Also, with this chart on my slide, it shows that animals not free ranged weigh more. Also, that animals free range are at a lower stock density due to organic production system because of the forced motor activity. The high motor activity affect the bones of the free range animals, and the effect of the meat quality on free range animals can be the temperature and cause variations in the quality of meat. The heat can increase abdominal fat, and cold temperature causes less fat, and the meat are deposited. Also, free-range animals have a lower water holding capacity than a caged animal, and the lower water holding capacity loses the nutritional value through a drier and tougher meat, which will not help your product sell at all. Into the current events. For Proposition 12, it was passed, and this creates specific rules about the size of cages and crates for pregnant pigs, egg-laying hens, and veal cows. It would be illegal to sell meat or eggs from animals kept in cages that don't meet the rules. In 2022, farmers would also be required to keep egg-laying hens in cage-free housing. The California Department of Food and Agriculture would enforce the rules, and the cost for the state would up to $10 million each year to enforce the new rules for Proposition 12. And the state could receive less money in taxes if farmers choose to raise fewer animals because farmers may need to build new cages or crates. Prop 12 will increase the cost of pork, veal, and eggs. So Prop 12 is not in favor for if you are against the free-range animals. Summary. The overall free-range and pasture-raised is something that has a lot of cons that many people may not consider. People who want free-range animals don't necessarily put into consideration the cons of doing so and putting animals in danger. Health for the animals is a big issue when talking about free range because they are getting a lot of exercise since they have so much land to move around. And that could be really hard on their legs, or their bones can become frail because they're not used to all this exercise. The temperature outside can also make an impact, considering how it can affect the meat of the animal. If it does not produce enough fat and if the water capacity is low, it will cause the meat to be drier and tougher meat. Also, the animals being out in the free range, they are more likely to get sick when it's hot or when it's cold, overheating, or getting pneumonia and things like that.